We've read about Mandal Commission and its recommendation of 27% reservation to people belonging to social and educationally backward classes. And we saw the different role played by the cabinet, the government officials, the Supreme Court, okay, and of course, President who made the announcement and finally gave, an announcement about this decision. Then let's see the need for political institutions. Why do we need political institutions? We've seen one example of how the government works. Governing a country involves various such activities. For example, the government is responsible for ensuring the security to its citizens and providing facilities for education and health for all. It collects tax and spends the money thus raised on administration, defense, development programs. It formulates and implements several welfare schemes. Some persons have to take decisions on how to go about these activities. Others have to implement, they have to implement whatever the decisions have been made. If disputes arise on these decisions or in their implementation, there should be someone to determine what is right and what is wrong. There should be somebody to guide us that you've done this wrong, or this is the correct way to do it is this. It is important that everyone should know who's responsible for doing what. It is also important that these activities keep taking place, even if the persons in key positions change. So it is always about the institution, and the institution is seen as a sacred, this thing is seen very sacred, and it's not about the person who is the people will come and go. Somebody will be minister today, somebody will go, somebody will come and take that designation and go, but it is the institution which stays there, right? So so to attend to all these tasks, several arrangements are made in all modern democracies. Such arrangements are called institutions. A democracy works well when these institutions perform functions assigned to them. The constitution of any country lays down basic rules on the powers and functions of each institution. So everybody, all the institutions have certain basic rules and how the powers and functions will be carried on. In the example above, we saw several institutions at work. The prime minister and the cabinet are institutions that take all the important policy decisions. So the civil servants working together are responsible for taking steps to implement the minister's decision. Supreme Court is an institution where disputes between citizens and the government are finally settled. So that's where the decisions are finally settled. Can you think of some other institutions in this example? What is their role? Working with institutions is not easy. Institution involves rules and regulation. This can bind the hands of leaders. Institutions involve meetings, committees, routines. This often leads to delays and complications. Therefore, dealing with institutions can be frustrating. One might feel that it is much better to have one person take all decisions without any rules, procedures, and meetings. But that is not the spirit of democracy. Some of the delays and complications introduced by institutions are very useful. They provide an opportunity for a wider set of people to be considered in any decision. So, a set of people are required. Institutions make it difficult to have good decisions taken very quickly, but they also make it equally difficult to rush through a bad decision. Okay, that is why democratic governments insist on institutions. So here you can see this girl saying, which institutions are at work in the running of your school? Would it be better if one person alone take all the decisions regarding the management of the school? Just imagine if there's only one person who's taking all the decisions. How hectic and how complicated would that it be for that one person? So the management of a school is not done by one person. There are a set of people who are responsible for different aspects of school management, whether you talk about fees, whether you talk about what syllabus is to be included, what kind of routine is to be followed in the school, what schedule, lunch break, everything, what is the timetable to be given, everything. The management in itself is a very complicated task. So let's read about Parliament. In the example of the Office Memorandum, do you remember the role of Parliament? Perhaps not, since this decision was not taken by the Parliament. You might think that the Parliament had no role in it, but let us look. Let us go back to the story and see whether Parliament figures in it. Let us recall the points made earlier by completing the following sentences. The report of the Mandal Commission was discussed. The President of India mentioned this in his dash the dash 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 the Prime Minister made a announcement. It is announcement dash. You are here, okay? The decisions was not directly taken in the parliament, but parliamentary discussion on the report the decisions was not directly taken in the parliament, but parliamentary discussions on the report influenced and shaped the decision on the government. They brought pressure on the government to act on the Mandal recommendation. So let's read further. Parliament, in the example of the office memorandum, we've done this, all the people who are there and everything. But parliamentary decisions, on the report influenced and shape the decision of the government. They brought pressure on the government to act, you know, on the Mandal Commission. If the parliament was not in favor of this decision, the government could not have gone ahead with it. Can you guess why? Recall what you read about parliament in the earlier class and try to imagine why, what the parliament could have done it if it not approved the cabinet decision. Why do we need a parliament? Let's question that and try to find an answer. In all democracies, an assembly of elected representatives exercise supreme political authority on behalf of the people. So this line, political authority, that to supreme level, they in that's what happens in a democracy on behalf of the people. In India, such a national assembly of elected representatives is called parliament. At the state level, this is called legislature or legislative assembly. So one, it is called parliament at the center government, and legislative assembly at the state level. The name may vary in different countries, but such an assembly exists in every democracy. Uh, it exercises political authority. So here, what we are talking about is this political authority. Somebody giving you political authority to act on their behalf. Parliament is the final authority for making laws in any country. This task of lawmaking or legislation is so crucial that these assemblies are called legislatures. So this whole task of making legislation or lawmaking is so important. That is why they are called legislatures. Parliaments all over the world can make new laws, change. They can make, they can change, they can abolish and make new ones in their place. Parliament all over the world exercise some control over those who run the government. In countries like India, this control is direct and full. Those who run the government can take decisions as long as they enjoy support of the parliament, and they can only do all this till the time they enjoy the support of the parliament, as in they have the majority uh, or sub vote and votes in the parliament. Parliament control all the money that the governments have in most countries. Any the public money can be spent only when the parliament sanctions it. So, in most countries, it is important for the parliament to sanction the money for specific functions. Parliament is the highest forum of discussion and debate. The most important aspect of parliament is discussion and debate on public issues and national policies in any country. Parliament can seek information on any matter. So we saw that how parliament has such supreme political authority, which is given by us, you, me, your parents, your relatives, and everybody. We give them through our votes, and that's how they get the supreme political authority to make decisions on our behalf. The two houses of parliament. Since the parliament plays a central role in modern democracies, most large democracies divide the role and powers of the parliament in two parts. They are called chambers or houses. One house is directly elected by the people and exercises the real power on the behalf of the people. The second house is usually elected indirectly and perform some special functions. So we can see there are two types of election here, directly, and second is indirectly, and perform some special function. The most common work for the second house is to look for the interest of various states, regions, and federal units. So the house we are talking about, the second house, that is the Rajya Sabha, their function is to look for the interest for various states, regions, and federal units. In our country, the parliament consists of two houses. We have two houses in the parliament. The houses are known as the Council of States, that is Rajya Sabha, and the House of the People, that is Lok Sabha. So don't forget that these two houses, they are very important: Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha, House of the People and House of the State. Council and the Council of the State. Sorry, the president is part of the parliament, although she is not a member of the house. So parliament can be he, she, whatever, but they are not part of the two houses, but they are part of the parliament. They do not belong to any house, Rajya Sabha or Lok Sabha, but they're part of the parliament. So parliament is equal to sorry. Parliament is equal to Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha plus the President of India. That is why all days, all laws made in the house come into force only after they receive the assent, is basically signature of the president. And if any decisions is made, and if the president does not give its signature, so that cannot be allowed to be carried forward. You may have read about the Indian parliament in earlier classes. From the chapter 4, you know how Lok Sabha elections take place. Let us recall some key differences between composition of these two houses of parliament. For Answer the following for the Lok Sabha and the Raj Sabha. What is the total number of members? So you can tell what is the total number of this thing, Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha. We've discussed that who elects the members. It is us, who elects them. Uh, what is the length of the term? In years, it is 5 years. Can the house be dissolved, or is it permanent? Of course, they can be removed. The house can be dissolved at any time, if they do not have the majority of the house. Which of the two houses is more powerful? So we there's always the debate that which house is more powerful. Is it the upper house, or is it the lower house? Okay, yes, so they are also Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha are also known as upper house and lower house, apart from the being known as the chambers. Okay. Where, it might appear that the Rajya Sabha is more powerful, for sometimes it is called the upper chamber, and the Lok Sabha is called the lower chamber. So this is what I was talking about, upper chamber, lower chamber. No, but this does not mean that Rajya Sabha is more powerful than Lok Sabha. It is just an old style of speaking and not the language used in our constitution. This is just the old style of speaking, and really don't go by the word. It's just been carried on from the past. Okay, so that's why it is called so. Our constitution does give the Rajya Sabha some special powers over the states, but on most matters, the Lok Sabha exercises supreme power. So both the houses, have their own special roles, and Rajya Sabha has some special roles over the states, whereas on most matters it is the Lok Sabha which exercises supreme power. Okay, let us see how any ordinary law needs. These are very important. Okay, all the points that we are going to discuss, pay attention. Any ordinary law needs to be passed by both the houses, but if there's a difference between the two houses, the final decision is taken in a joint session in which the members of both the houses sit together. Besides, because of the larger number of members, the view of Lok Sabha is likely to prevail in such a meeting. So if there's any ordinary law, then um, the law needs to be passed in both the houses. Okay, but in case that if this thing there is a difference in opinion between the Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha, then the final decision is taken by the joint session. So this session is very important, okay? And usually when the voting is done, of course, Lok Sabha will win because it has 543, to be correct, 545 members in the house. Okay, so they are more in number, so of course they are going to, if the voting is done, they are going to be the major number. That is why it is saying that Lok Sabha is likely to prevail in such a meeting. Lok Sabha exercises more powers in money matters. Only once the Lok Sabha passes the budget of the government or any other money related law, the Rajya Sabha cannot reject it. The Rajya Sabha can delay it by only 14 days or suggest changes in it. The Lok Sabha may or may not accept these changes. So you see the money, money is power, okay? And here it's clearly saying that Lok Sabha exercises more powers in money matters. And even if the Rajya Sabha does not agree to anything, they can just give suggestions and they have to return the this thing, or they have to they cannot delay it more than 14 days. And whether they agree it or not on money matters, or on money law or money related this thing related matters, then they just have to return it in 14 days, and they might give some suggestions which is not necessary. The Lok Sabha is not forced to accept it. It depends on them. When the parliament is in session, there is a special program every day on Doordarshan about the proceedings in Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. What the proceedings about it in the newspapers, and know the following powers of the two houses: power, role of the speaker, role of opposition. You can do this activity, whenever if you have time. And yeah, so the third important this thing is that most importantly, the Lok Sabha controls the Council of Ministers. Only a person who enjoys the support of the majority of the members in the Lok Sabha is appointed the prime minister. So how is prime minister? So all these people are elected in their constituency by winning a margin of votes. But how is the prime minister selected? So whoever enjoys the majority of votes in the whoever won in the majority of the part, the vote, the party which got the majority of votes, out of this a person has to be selected, and whoever gets the majority out of them, he becomes the prime minister. If the majority of the Lok Sabha members say that they have no confidence in the Council of Minister, all ministers including the minister have to quit. The Rajya Sabha does not have this power. So what is there, that if there is the Lok Sabha says that we have no confidence in the Council of Ministers, then all the ministers including the prime minister, they have to quit. And that's how the house is dissolved, and whoever is the who has the majority of support, they make the next government. That's how, if there is a tenure left. The 5 years have not been completed in that case. So let's see what does a day in the life of a Lok Sabha member looks like. 7th December 2000. So this is a day in the life of the Lok Sabha. Lok Sabha, the lower house of the parliament. Let's see. 7th December 2004 was an ordinary day in the life of the 14th Lok Sabha. Uh, let us look at the let us take a look at what happened in the course of that day. Identify the role and powers of the parliament on the basis of the proceedings for the day as given below. You can also enact this in your classroom, so you can enact this whole thing. At 11 o'clock, various ministries gave written answers to about 250 questions that were asked by members. These included what is the government policies on taking on militant group, what are the figures of atrocities against scheduled tribe, including those infected by policies, what is the government doing about overpricing of medicines by big companies. So at around 11 o'clock, they give the various ministers for various departments give the written answers regarding the following question. At 12 o'clock, a large number of official documents were presented and available for discussion. These included, so there was at 12 o'clock, there were documents presented and there was a discussion on recruitment rules for the Indo-Tibetan ITB, say ITBP force, annual report on the IIT Technology Institute, reports and accounts, on the Rashtriya Ispat Nigam Limited, Vishakhapatnam. So that's how it was there. Then around 12 to the Minister of Development of Northeastern region. Mm, okay. Uh, Made a statement regarding revitalization of the Northeastern Council. The Minister of State for Railways presented a statement showing the grant needed by the railways in addition to the um, uh, sanctioned in the railway budget. The Ministry for HRD introduced the National Commission for Minority Educational Institutions Bill 2004. He also gave a statement explaining why the government had to bring an ordinance for this. Around 12:14, several members highlighted this some issues. So there were some members that highlighted some issues like the vindictiveness of the CBI in registering cases against some leaders in the Tehelka case, need to include Rajasthani as an official language in the constitution, need to renew insurance policies of farmers and agriculture workers of Andhra Pradesh. Around 226, two bills processed around 226, two bills proposed by the government were considered and passed. Two bills were considered and they were passed. These bills were securities. So we are talking about bills here, okay? They were passed: security enforcement of security interests and recovery of debt laws. Amendment bill at fine so at 4 o'clock, finally there was long discussion. Again there was a discussion at 4 o'clock regarding the foreign policy of the government and the need to continue an independent foreign policy in the context of the situation in Iran. So there was a discussion on that. Around 7:17 discussion concluded, House adjourned. So how around 7:17 the House adjourned for the next day. Adjourned matlab we said now the proceedings will happen. Proceedings and everything, discussions and everything. The whole this process of Parliament Lok Sabha will continue the next day. Adjourned. When we say na adjourned, so you always notice, okay, adjourned for next day, for 6 months, for 1 year. So there is a time period for which the so this is very important. I'm telling you, keep it in mind. For whatever the days over and everything. So they tell that for when will we meet next. So that's what it means. It says adjourned for next day. Matlab we'll meet tomorrow now. So I'm just giving you those. So now let's talk about political executive. Do you remember the story of the office memorandum which we have started, with which we started this chapter? We found out that the persons who signed the document did not take this decision. Uh, he was only executing the policy decision taken by someone else. So we saw that how prime minister takes the major decisions, but we also know that he could not have taken that decision if he did not have the support. The support is very important from the Lok Sabha. In that sense, he was just only executing the wishes of the parliament. Thus, at different levels of any government, we find functionaries who take day to day decisions, but do not exercise supreme power on behalf of the people. All those functionaries are collectively known as executive. So these they are known as executive who do functions of day to day activities, but they do not have the supreme power on behalf of the people. They are called executive because they are in charge of the execution of the policies of the government. Now you know that why they are called executive. Political and permanent executive. Now we'll talk about political and permanent executive. In a democratic country, two categories make up the executive. One that is elected by the people for a specific period is called the political executive. So this is the person whom we elect. Political leaders who take the big decisions fall in this category. In the second category, people are appointed on a long term basis. This is called the permanent executive. Or civil services. Civil services is it holds a very important role. So, persons working in civil services are called civil servants. They remain in office even when the ruling party changes. So, even if the party will change, they will not have the support of the people. Elections will come and go. Civil servants are the people who will still remain in office. These officers work under political executive and assist them in carrying out day-to-day active, day-to-day administration. So, it is these civil servants who help in carrying out the day-to-day activities. Okay, can you recall the role of political and non-political executive in the case of office memorandum? So the role of non office in the case of office memorandum, we had the Mandal Commission, right? So here the political role was that they came up with a policy of a reservation that 27% will be set as a reservation for people belonging to socially and educationally backward classes, but it is the non-political executive who's actually going to execute it on the ground. So you might ask, why does the political executive have more power than the non-political executive? Why is the minister more powerful than the civil servant? The civil servant is usually more educated and have more expert knowledge of the subject. The advisors working in the finance ministry know more about economics than the finance minister. Sometimes the ministers may know very little about the technical matters that come under their ministry, or they might even not know anything. This could easily happen in ministries like defense, industry, health, science and technology, mining and etc., because here an expert knowledge and expertise is required. Why should these ministers have the final say? Then why do these ministers, who have no background or even their education qualification is not as much, why are their say taken as more important than the civil servants or people who have more expertise in those subjects? The reason is very simple. In our democracy, the will of the people, because it's the will. I have chosen somebody to represent me and I think they can do it. Will of the people is supreme. The minister is elected by the people and thus empowered to exercise the will of the people on their behalf, and that's what gives the minister the final word, because they have power on behalf of us. She is finally answerable to the people for all the consequences of her decision. So whatever the minister decides, he, she, or whoever is it, whoever that person is decides, they'll be answerable to me as a voter. And that is why the minister takes all the final decisions. The minister decides the overall framework and the objectives in which decisions and policies should be made. So now you know the answer, that even when politicians are not educated, why it is their wordings are more important. The minister is not and is not expected to be an expert in the matter of her or his ministry. The minister takes the advice of experts on all technical matters, but very often experts hold very different opinions on place before her more than even one option. Depending on what the overall objective is, the minister decides. And then when all the technical aspects and everything are given, knowledge about that is given to the minister, then that the decision is made, that what is the ultimate aim to bring about that policy scheme or whatever it is, what objective, and then that is how the decision is made, keeping in mind that actually this happens in any large organization. Those who understand the overall picture take the most important decisions and not the experts. And that's also happens in most of the organizations, where it's not the expert who take decisions, but someone, the manager, who knows everything, the bigger picture. The experts can tell the route, but someone with a larger view decides the destination. So in a democracy, elected ministers perform this role. So you see this, this cartoon, addition and subtraction cabinet list, you can read here. The race to become a minister is not new. Here is a cartoon depicting ministerial aspirants waiting to get a berth in Nehru's cabinet after the 1962 elections. Why do you think political leaders are so keen to become ministers? These are all the ministers, the MLAs, and they want to be in the cabinet. They want to hold a ministry. They want to they want to have a charge over a ministry and be called a minister. So why do they want that? Because of course, if they head a ministry, they will have some powers and they will have some benefits and so on. And that's the reason, why they want to be in the cabinet of the prime minister. Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers. Prime Minister is the most important political institution in the country, yet there is no direct election to the post of Prime Minister. The President appoints the Prime Minister, but the President cannot appoint anyone. Uh, but the President cannot appoint anyone she likes. The President appoints the leader of the majority party or the coalition party that commands a majority in the Lok Sabha as Prime Minister. So whoever has a majority out of all the elected MLAs, out of them, one whoever has his maximum support becomes the prime minister. In the case of no single party or alliance gets a majority, the president appoints the person most likely to secure a majority support. The prime minister does not have a fixed tenure. The tenure of the prime minister is not fixed, as in like as he continues to be power so long as he remains the leader of the majority party coalition. So long as he has the support of the of the party, or the Lok Sabha, he remains to be the prime minister. After the appointment of prime minister, the president appoints other ministers on the advice of prime minister. So once the prime minister is elected, then the president appoints other ministers, on which is decided by the prime minister. The ministers are usually from the party or the coalition that has the majority of the Lok Sabha. So whoever are the ministers, they're usually part of the party who's won the coalition, or other party. Okay. The prime minister is free to choose ministers as long as they're member of the parliament. So the prime minister can make his own cabinet, but the only condition is that person has to be member of the parliament. Sometimes a person who's not a member of parliament can also become a minister, and they can become, but such a minister has to get elected, within a elected to one of the houses of the parliament, with to get they have to get elected to one of the houses of the parliament within 6 months of appointment as a minister. So this time interval, of 6 months is very important. Within 6 months, if they are made, if they are, even if they are not member of the parliament, but if they want to be a member, the prime minister chooses him or her as the um, minister. Okay, then that person has to get elected into one of the houses of the parliament within a period of 6 months of appointment as minister. Okay, so I hope that is clear. Council of Ministers is the official name for the body that includes all the ministers. So the Council of Ministers, it's like a group, that's called the council. Matlab you take their advice. That usually includes all the ministers. It usually has 60 to 80 ministers of different ranks. So in the Council of Ministers, there are usually 60 to 80 ministers which are of different rank. Okay.